happened if I had been an activist from the beginning. It was the fact that I had lived 31 years in a kind of numb limbo. If someone had asked me what meaning my life had, I couldn't have answered it. So I was old enough to be really conscious of a shift that began to take place. I was married and living in France, and there were soldiers who had deserted from the army and were resisting the war that were living in Paris, who sought me out, as they did all expats, to try to help them, with medical stuff and dental stuff and things like that. And they were the ones that helped me understand what the war really was. And that's when I decided that I was going to leave my life in France and move back to the United States. Here we say, Hanoi Jane, go back to whatever. Well, I came home. The way to protest is in your own home, as one of your own people. And I came back, and I began to meet people that were different than any people I had ever met before. They were really smart people who could have been entering corporate America or any kind. But they were devoting their lives and their intelligence and their energy to trying to end the war in Vietnam. There was one woman in particular. I began to travel around to GI coffee houses where Karen's husband was very involved. And in one of them, outside of Fort Hood in Killeen, Texas, there was a woman that ran it. It was the Oleo Strut. I was maybe 6-7 months into being an activist. And really my job at that time was to travel around and find out what was going on and talk to GIs and go to bases. And I came to this coffee house and stayed there for a while. And this woman changed my life. She doesn't even know that she did. But I didn't really see, I felt, it was a somatic experience, that her way of being in the world and as the leader in that GI coffee house was different than anything I had ever seen, and different than any of the male leadership that I had seen in other coffee houses. For example, rather than telling me what they wanted me to do, which usually involves my getting arrested and being smuggled on base, it was rough, it really was. No, she said, how do you feel about this? Tell me why you've chosen to be part of the GI movement. Do you have any ideas about, now you don't know how something as simple as that, the effect that it had on me. She was seeing me not as a celebrity that could be used, but as a human being. She thought enough of me to ask my opinion. No one had ever done that. I watched her with GIs. She did the same with them. And that was when I realized that it wasn't just ending a war that the movement was about. It was changing the way people relate to each other. It was changing the entire paradigm on which our society operates. It was like looking through a keyhole into the way things could be when we win. It was a tumultuous year that year. The invasion of Cambodia, the shooting of the Kent State students in Jackson State. I mean, there were all kinds of really heavy things going down. But it was her. It was my experience with her that lodged in my heart and remained with me. I knew what we were working for. And I tell you this now, especially to the young ones here, because what it said to me is, over and beyond the words and the stats and all of that, we have to carry within us, as who we are and how we behave, what we want the world to become. Yeah. That no matter what we say, it's how we make people feel that will cause them to join us. And you know, we shouldn't be about talking to people and being with people who agree with us. It should be about, and when you lobby, you're going to find this, reaching the people who aren't so sure. You know, there's some, you know, who've been so wounded that they cannot open their hearts and their ears to what you have to say. But there's so many that are in the middle that the way you are can persuade them. What else did I want to say? I want to say that last night when I first arrived at the hotel, the first thing I saw was some very old people and some very young people, and I thought, this is a good organization. My own history as an activist has several lessons. It's never too late. You know, I became an activist at 31, but I don't think that I really owned my voice until I was about 60. I was sort of traveling on other people's narratives, usually my husband's. The men, you know, I always knew that I needed to find my narrative. I didn't expect early on that the narrative would be a gender-based narrative. It took me a long time, and we don't have the time now for me to explain why it took so long, to discover that ultimately, underneath everything, what we're addressing here is patriarchy. I'm not talking men, I'm talking patriarchy. I'm talking about this social paradigm that creates a hierarchical construct, which means somebody has to be over somebody else, and that women don't operate that way. I mean, some women do, and this is another thing when we talk about putting women at the table of power. We want to put women at the table of power, but we have to ask them to please be women when they're there. And not as a ventriloquist with a patriarchy, just because we have vaginas doesn't mean that we're going to necessarily do the right thing. I won't name names. That it has more to do with conscience than it does gender. There are so many men who stand with us, and some of them are in this room, who get it. There is a feminist masculinity that we have to help bring to the fore. And it took me a long time to get it. And so you young people, you know, just learn your stories, claim your narrative, best if it comes from your own gut. We become most effective as advocates when it's our passion, when it comes from our core being. And so collect your stories. One of the reasons that I traveled so much, one of the reasons that I went to Vietnam was because I knew I needed stories. Women are like that. We need to experience. It can be our own stories. We don't have to maybe even leave our home, but it was what was so valuable about being part of the GI movement is when I went to talk to legislators, I could bring stories of soldiers, and it's why I like the trophy so much. I view us as amplifiers. What are they? You know, repeaters, those things on the top of mountains, those antennas. What do? They pick up voices down in the valley that aren't quite strong enough to come up and over to reach a broader audience. That's what we are. When we talk to legislators, we're bringing stories and voices that they might not have heard. So gather your stories. Have the fire in the belly. It never goes out, does it? It can last until the day we die, or right before then. So I thank you for having me here. I'm really honored, and I love my award, and I'm so proud of all the work